سيداتي والسادة الضيوف الكرام، اسمحوا لي أن أعبر عن سعادتي بالمشاركة في هذا المؤتمر اليوم. هذا المؤتمر الذي يجمع نخبة من رجال الدولة والمفكرين الذين شاركونا وقدموا لنا خلال الثلاث أيام موضوع جد مهم، قديم وحديث، وموضوع ساعة. وأود في هذا الصدد أن أتوجه بالشكر لبروفيسور إسماعيل سراج الدين لدعوتي لحضور هذا الحدث، وإنني أشكره وأشكر الفريق الذي يعمل معه لإدارتهم الرشيدة لهذا الصرح الكبير الذي بالرغم من كافة التحديات والتغيرات التي شهدتها البلاد ما زال يحتفظ بامتيازه ليظل منارة للمعرفة والثقافة والعلوم، ليظل مركزاً للحوار بين الشعوب وبين الحضارات، نموذجاً يجب أن يحتذى به في مجال التنمية المستدامة للدول. دون أن أتحدث طويلاً عن كل ما قدم، أنتقل الآن لهذه الجلسة الهامة التي تتناول موضوعات جديدة وأفكار يمكن الأخذ بها للتقدم وللإصلاح في مجال الديمقراطية. Our 12th session is about direct democracy, participatory budgeting, and pioneering democratic initiative. Every speaker will have 10 minutes, and we will start with Professor Bruno Kaufmann. The subject is direct democracy, description and global examples.
Thank you very much. I'm happy for three reasons just now to be here. First, I'm happy that I'm finally allowed to speak. It makes it easier for me because I haven't slept a lot last night, just 2 hours. I arrived at 4 o'clock this morning, so I missed a part of your very important conference. But I'm also happy because yesterday, at that time of the day, I could sit together with my friends and colleagues from Tunisia in the City Hall of Oslo when they got honored by the Nobel Peace Prize. And it was for me especially also a very fantastic experience because I have worked a lot together with them in the last years. And what did they get the prize for? They get the prize for conducting dialogue. The National Quartet for Dialogue got the Peace Nobel Prize, so it's the first time that this prize has been given to this kind of democratic dialogue as a process. And it's all about, in principle, we are talking about. It's about dialogue. It's the eternal idea of democracy already from Mr. Pericles, that what is the difference between a democracy and a non-democracy? In a democracy, you have a dialogue before you make a decision. So that was a very, very wonderful thing. And I'm also happy, of course, and now at the first place to be here with you in this fantastic, important place of the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, which is for me a symbol really of the idea of reflection, of meeting, of dialogue as well, and it's the first time that I'm here, and I'm very, very glad for that, and I think this conference is extremely important. I want to share with you a few things. My American colleagues say always to me, I'm a person with many hats, and I say, I have never a hat, but I'm an active citizen in different situations. And that's basically what has made, during the last 30 years, my activities. I'm an active citizen locally, I'm an active citizen nationally, I'm an active citizen globally. But in principle, I'm just you can say, a journalist. I have worked with local newspapers in Switzerland, with national newspapers in Germany, with radio in Sweden, and I'm a journalist who wants to share knowledge, who is curious about things, and who wants to be part of a global conversation. And I'm born in Switzerland, And as a Swiss citizen, also as a Swedish citizen, I have, of course, many opportunities to be an active citizen. In fact, I'm eligible voter in 9 different constituencies. I can vote many, many times. I have participated in more than 1,000 national referendums. I have written under many hundreds initiatives. And this has, of course, given me a lot of experience. And I must say, most of the decisions and elections I have participated in, I have lost. And still, I'm very happy with being able to participate in all that. And one key experience which I had as a very young person was in the 1980s in Switzerland, when we felt that the Swiss army had become something else than just something to defend the country. Because of the 2 world wars, people in Switzerland thought the army is the most important thing. They should have as much money as possible, and we couldn't even question anything about it. So what did we do? We gathered signatures, 100,000 signatures within 1.5 years to have a national vote if we want to have this army or not. And people would give us 5% maximum, because the government at that time in Switzerland said, Switzerland has no army, it is an army. And we wanted to change that, and we got a vote in 1989, 2 weeks after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we got 35.6%, 70% of the under 30 young people. And this was for me a very fundamental experience. We lost the vote, but we won the debate. So since then, I'm convinced that a democracy which is really a valid democracy which can be developed is a democracy which produces happy losers. And that's something which has, for me, been a guiding line in all discussions about doing democracy. I have become very active in Europe. I was one of the persons to propose and to work for the introduction of a direct democratic instrument on the European level, the European Citizen Initiative, since 1991. This instrument now allows us in Europe as European citizens to make initiatives towards the European Commission by gathering 1 million signatures on the internet. And I'm since 5 years ago also member in Sweden of a local government where I'm responsible as chairman of the election commission and for citizen participation. And we have in these 5 years tried to use all this knowledge which are discussed here, participatory budgeting, all other kinds of participatory democracy as a supportive structure for our democracy, because I think all these tools are very important, but in the end, of course, it's also about that we have the right to vote, we have the right to make decisions, otherwise we don't engage in all these different things. So that's City Hall in Falun in Sweden, where we work, and we have done now a work to propose that every citizen get a democracy passport, that the libraries become democracy centers, and this European, democracy passport ID has been taken also by the European Union as an ID. So this democracy passport now is available in 22 languages, and you can take one outside after this session. Worldwide, I've been very active now in the last years to create a media platform which I'm responsible for with the Swiss National Radio and TV, which is basically the idea to have citizen media in all different kind of languages. From Swiss Info, it's called People to Power, and you can access their materials in 10 languages, inclusive Arab, about participatory and direct democracy. And we are about 80 people working with this full-time now globally. And finally, I have done a lot of work with the forum called the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy to promote that. There, our partners from Tunisia have been very important. So what's direct democracy? What's a modern direct democracy? We are talking sometimes like this is something different from a representative democracy. I think the fundamental problem we have today is that we want to differ direct and indirect democracy in a way that representative democracy is something else. But the modern direct democracy is always part of a representative democracy. It's never on another side. It's not like some people come to Sweden and say, I have seen the midnight sun, but it was nothing special. It's the same sun as I have seen 2 hours before. And that's exactly what direct democracy is about. It's just the possibility to not just elect others and give away your vote, but you keep your vote and being able to propose and to decide on issues even between elections. And this is basically, if you look around the world, we have made such an overview. We have a navigator to direct democracy. 110 countries do have in their constitutions form of modern direct democracy, and you have, of course, to see how well they work and now. But the big question about all that is how can we use direct democratic tools in making our representative democracy more democratic and democracy more democratic. And I think the fundamental things are that we need to use, wherever we are, in every situation we are, we need to use anchors, we need to use elements which we can build our things on. We cannot just reinvent all the time new forms. That's too abstract, that's too intellectual. We need to go from where we are, and there is always something which has to do with interest of people, with equality, with freedoms. So you can build on things in each history, in each country. Secondly, I think we need a lot to create spaces for democracy. It has been discussed here that polling is something like direct democracy. It's of course not. It's not only that just a few are asked, it's also that there's no space for reflection, for debate. When we made our initiative for abolishing the Swiss Army, it took us 6 years from the start to the end. So it was a conversation, it was a discussion. In the end, people made a decision, but you need space for debate. You need space for qualifying ourselves to be active citizens. It's not a quick fix. We cannot shortcut all these problems with certain methods. We need time and space, and I think this library is a very fantastic space, and we work a lot on that also with libraries, for instance, in my town, about that. And thirdly, and the most important thing, we need actions. Never in history, democracy has been delivered on a silver plate like in a restaurant when you order a dessert. Those in power never are so interested to share power. I remember, yeah, the 10 minutes are over, but I'm finishing now. I remember when people say, yeah, you from Switzerland, you are grown up with democracy from your mother. But then they say, when I was born, my mother not even had the right to vote. So even in a country like Switzerland, every single progress, every single power sharing had to be fighted for. And it wasn't just given by somebody. So we need to use ourselves, our common collective action to promote democracy, and we have to fight for it in many different ways. And I think this conference is a good example that there is an anchor, there is a space, and there is also action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and for respecting the time.
I'm a radio journalist, and then it's finished, the program.
Thank you so much. And now Mr. Giovanni Allegretti with the participatory budgeting description and global examples.
Thank you very much for this invitation that allows me to interact with colleagues on very interesting issues for my life. I was trying to see the timetable, but strange because the main, yeah, okay, now it's okay. I wanted to see the clock that was covered by the computer, so. I will try to clarify some elements related to an issue that several colleagues this morning have been touching. And the issue is what is participatory budgeting? In the last years, we have been experiencing a lot of awards given to participatory budgeting. Here there are some, one in the last year. The last one are the AfriCity Awards 2015, last week in Johannesburg. 3 cities from Africa, in Congo, Tunisia, Cameroon, has been awarded for the best participatory budgeting of the continent. And Participatory budgeting, why is receiving so many awards? I think because it can be read as a form of participation of people to public choices, somehow more radical than others. For the first reason that it touches an issue, discretionarity of money distribution, which normally has not been touched on by many other process of participation. And in this sense, we can see it as a pedagogic tool that goes beyond the choices that it proposes. So something to help people to understand that economy is about choices and not an untouchable mainstream destiny, as sometimes in the liberal world we imagine the idea of economy. So with only one type of economy possible. And a second reason is because it's a powerful space to restructure mutual trust between citizen and institution through an experience of learning by doing. Citizens learn to the complexity of governing through trying themselves on a portion of a budget to co-decide on how to spend for enhancing or increasing their quality of life. And the growth of participatory budgeting happened in the framework of multiple crises, and also in some cases in the framework of new democratization of states. For example, one of the example, again, Tunisia today, more interesting has been the series of participatory budgeting that were born in Tunisia in the last 2 years. One of them was awarded as a best practice, the one of La Marsa last week. So in many countries is still a pioneering initiative, but in others is a consolidated practice. At the point, then here I put some data, but at the point that in Brazil, where participatory budgeting was born 25 years ago, it's difficult to find a mayor who wants to invest in it, because it's not considered anymore an innovation. It's considered a consolidated practice. So, and it was part of a flagship project of the previous administration. So many administrators, they do not accept to live in the shade of the previous ones, and so in many cases, flagship projects are forgotten by the next one. So in other cases, as many cities of Brazil demonstrate, the participatory budgeting became so important in social terms that no kind of administration, even with several political change, could cancel this practice. Here you have the translated in Egypt, the Arab version of the handbook on participatory budgeting created by the United Nations. Now, defining participatory budgeting in this series of numerous experiences is quite difficult, because many of them are very different. Participatory budgeting can be defined like an ideoscape, so something that's a model that becomes real in the practice, and so the practices are continuously changed the model itself. And so it's an evolving model. But if we try a common point, we can define participatory budgeting as a democratic process of decision-making, complementary to representative democracy, which entrusts citizens and not citizen tools. So that means that it's centered in the inhabitants who produce a territory, not who has the formal status of a citizen. That's why in many participatory budgeting, children vote despite not having the age for voting in the election, for example. And they are entrusted to decide how to allocate part of a municipal budget or another budget that affects them, including budget of agencies which have a legal status of public-private agencies. So usually it is mainly applied to the part of investments because it's the most flexible one, but also because it's the one that produces more effects in the public space, so visible and understandable for the people. The name is not important. Here you have many examples of participatory budgeting around the world that has not this name, because some politicians are scared that the terms budget appears too technical to be attractive for citizens to contribute. What is very important of participatory budgeting is that it's made out of two cycles. The first cycle is decision-making, collective decision-making. The second one is implementation and evaluation. Without any implementation, participatory budgeting does not work. I know many cases that in the second year they died, included like 77% of the participatory budgeting of the last decade in Portugal, because people do not see products, do not see impacts, no? And so they think, why do we have to do something so complex as giving our free time to participate to something that is meaningless in political terms? I will skip, sorry, I had another PowerPoint simplified, but it seems that it was put here the wrong version, and so I have to skip. So in this sense, participatory budgeting is very important when it takes care of the effects, no? So there is this formula, satisfaction is major or equal to result less expectation. That means taking care seriously of the expectation of people. For example, I was last week with the Romanian mayor of Cluj-Napoca, which has the most effective participatory budgeting in Europe, also in terms of value of money put in discussion with citizens. And he told me that one of his main important feature of the process is exactly trying to reorganize the municipality in order to deliver in time the decision of people transform it into public works for the people to be optimistic on the process the next year. And that's why the process is growing and growing fastly. And the majority of processes are working when they are co-decisional. There have been some experience of participatory budgeting in the advisory domain, consultative, but they didn't work out because they were creating frustration in people, expectation and frustration, but in the administration they were obliging them to justify dozen and dozen of no, we are not going to do this, we are going to do that. So people was asking, why my idea not, and the idea of my neighbor yes? And so this explanation took so much time that the municipality said, why do we have to lose so much time in explaining choices that we cannot do? So maybe it's better to leave to people the possibility to co-decide. So one of the most important elements in relation to other processes is that the center of participatory budgeting is in the individuals, but they are put in a public space where they learn from the others. They have to learn mutual respect, how to listen in the others. And that's quite rare because many of the other participatory processes are normally centered on stakeholders, no? But we have to be careful. There are examples of participatory budgeting, just online participatory budgeting as in Germany, which are not working so well to reconstruct trust because they just sum mechanically preference of individual. They are not creating a space of deliberation in which people change idea, examine collectively different experience. I wanted to finish just showing some of the geographies of the called return of caravels from the south to the north of participatory budgeting. And another phenomenon which is very important, today we have 3,000 participatory budgeting around the world, and these are national network of participatory budgeting where municipalities do peer-to-peer learning. The most interesting experience I know is Madagascar, where 150 participatory budgeting have been managing to double or triple the resources of the municipalities because they have been working, obliging international firms of mining to pay the royalties that before were not paid. So it was very interesting, the exchange there was between the way of managing together expenditures and the way of getting new revenues. These are examples in Europe of participatory budgeting at regional level, where regions, or in the case of Poland, national governments are trying to stimulate participatory budgeting through national laws that help them to develop. And I finish with explaining one last thing that I think is important. And participatory budgeting works in this way. Every year it has a part of deliberation and a part of public voting. The first one is legitimating the process in terms of quality, and the second one in terms of quantity. For example, the city of Cascais, which is a right-wing city in Portugal, one of the richest cities in Portugal, 200,000 inhabitants. The first year had 700 persons debating and 6,000 voting. So each person brought more or less 10 friends to vote their priorities. In the second year had 24,000 and 24,000 voters, and in the third year Oh, sorry, interpreters told me to slow down. Okay, so, yeah, because I had 20 minutes, then 15, now 10, and so the only thing I found was rushing. Okay, sorry. And in the second year, I have 900 deliberating and 24,000 voting. In the third year has 1,200 deliberating and 40,000 voting. This year there were 56,000 voting, so 1/4 of the population. And the mayor has been elected with 28,000, so half of the votes that were given this year to participatory budgeting. So just to understand that the process work in different dimensions. And also in terms of environments, while the space of co-decision is unique, so a platform to vote, which can be online or in person, the way of collecting ideas and deliberating on them can be very different, including specific process for children, for women, for the elderly, for disabled people, use of ICT, and several experience of random selected panels in order to try to get points of view which normally would not be self-mobilized. I want to finish with this. When it was born in Latin America, participatory budgeting was centered on big assemblies of thousands of poor people in the slums, in many cases, and the case of Porto Alegre is the most famous. But today, sliding to Europe, to Australia, to the United States, much attention has been given to the fact that people to deliberate has to be in small, comfortable space. And so today, you see participatory budgeting with thousands of tables in the same meeting with a small group of people deliberating and then some in their deliberation and then choosing option. So the process became more complex, but somehow more effective in terms of inclusion, also using some methods of distributing the money to the most vulnerable people or creating collected visit in the public spaces in order to know the territory. And these are participatory budgeting where children discuss public money, and this is the last moment I think I wanted to explain is a new change in the voting system of participatory budgeting. This has been experienced in the Czech Republic and now in 5 districts of New York. It's centered on the idea that when people has 3 votes instead of 1, they change completely the way in which they distribute their votes. And so this study showed in New York that people change their mind in relation also to this is the negative voting, for example, who helped to create spin-off processes where you face specifically the most contested projects. And this is the last slide. It's about an important phase of control of public policies, which is the implementation. This is in Mozambique, and this is in Sevilla. So 2 methods different to follow step by step the way in which the quality of public work is being constructed. Because especially in the poor areas, the private sector build things with a very poor quality because they are things for poor people. And so empowering the poor people to learn how to have good quality of public works and then helping them to oblige the private sector to deliver better quality of work has been one of the interesting effects of the participatory budgeting in the last year. These 2 persons are Marisa Matias, candidate to the presidency of the Republic in Portugal. She's an expert of participatory budgeting, Euro deputy in the European Parliament. And he's Antonio Costa, the new Prime Minister, who did the participatory budgeting of Lisbon, the first co-decisional in Portugal, and now put in his program the national participatory budgeting in Portugal. So I hope that these 2 phases will explain us soon how participatory budgeting can influence a change in the representative democracy. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Allegretti, for this very interesting presentation. And now we have Mrs. Sanskriti Mino with the presentation about pioneering democratic renewal.
May I thank you, the interpreters, for their patience?
Thank you. quick introduction to where I am from. Yeah. I work and live in the city of Pune, which is close to Bombay. That's a map of India. And this is a city where I am doing an action research project, which I will describe to you as a small case in trying to initiate deliberative democracy. First, the context. Okay. Yeah, you know, India is a constitutional democracy, a parliamentary democracy, and we have representatives chosen through elections and at different levels, at the national government level, at the state level, and at the city and village at the local self-government level. We have elections regularly, and mostly they are free and fair. And as a tool, it's been quite good, and this was last year's when Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government came in. So I think the results do show that participation in election is okay. But we are looking at the structure below representatives and how does the electorate actually interact on many different issues and give their views into the final decisions or the facilitated decisions by elected representatives. And we're looking at deliberative democracy as a necessary complement to representative democracy. The first is, of course, an ethic that participation is a right for citizens. And we are exploring but better solutions are likely. This is something that we hope is right, and we are exploring through our action research projects. There are efforts to deepen democracy, and Giovanni, you might like to explore whether, what happens in rural India is in fact perhaps a form of participatory planning and budgeting, because there is a law, the 73rd Constitutional Amendment, by which people, these are assemblies, these are Gram Sabhas, and they have the right to decide about the plans and the budgets for their village and the block and the district above them. So they have been influential in the budget and also the monitoring of the projects that come in. This was more famous in Kerala earlier, and now over the last few years, about a decade or so, through the efforts of the Government of India and certain state governments and with support from UNICEF, it is graduated into something which is facilitated using techniques like PRA to actually prepare a development report for the village, and then women's Gram Sabha or assembly is held, and then the village assembly is held to actually plan and then decide the budget for the village. So it might be useful to look at, Giovanni, whether this qualifies in your PB process. I noticed there is a dot on India in your map. So now the thing is that the law for rural India is different from the law for urban India, and we don't have something analogous to an assembly in urban India. So there isn't a city sabha kind of a situation. And it's in that context that we have been looking at how do you create these systems of participation in urban areas, which are characterized by perhaps a different kind of complexity than urban areas, than rural areas, and densities and a very high mixed usage and very many different issues in the urban space. A project that we started a couple of years ago, which is in Dattawadi, it's about a square kilometer in size, a small neighborhood in Pune, which is residential area mixed use. This was a sort of an area planning, street design kind of a project. And this is the kind of situation, the kind of people that are present in Dattawadi, a lot of street activity. And this is the case that I'll just take forward and describe for a few minutes, and then the learnings that we got from this experiment, this action research. So firstly, as Janet first described in the morning, that deliberative democracy is sort of a phenomenon in which everyday people participate in the co-creation of solutions. It is inclusive of diverse viewpoints, and it's representative. It involves time and space, like you also mentioned, for looking at different inputs, looking at different points of view, and having the time to clarify your own values and look at options that are available to you. And that the process is actually influential in decision-making, that all these different inputs that are coming in and that the decision-making is happening within the group leads a coherent way forward. So this is a kind of a sort of a framework to look at deliberative processes, deliberative democratic processes. How did we start? That's me with longer hair at that time, talking to the corporator. The corporator is a local councillor. So the city is divided into a number of wards, and in Pune, as it happens, that corporator panel of 2 corporators would represent about 50,000 population. So these are sort of key stakeholders, and they are also the panel which decides finally the budget for the city. And it was important that any such process that we want to undertake in their ward required that we actually take them into confidence, tell them what this process might be like, and this particular person was quite happy and willing to go forward with the experiment. Not very happy, right? But okay with the idea that, okay, let's try something new. And it involved us talking to a number of different kinds of groups within that area, and looking at also who could be facilitators and who could actually help us with the process. We partnered with a College of Architecture, women's architecture school, and these students actually did a number of the information collection studies about what's the street design like, what are the conflicts that are coming up, what are the issues. And this was then taken into an inquiry by design process, where we had a deliberation. The information that was gathered was, the group that was gathered was people from the community, from Dattawadi. They were not really randomly sampled because, I'll talk a little about the issues of sampling that we've found, but we were able to get a number of diverse kind of groups from Dattawadi, as well as partner NGOs and the local administration, planning people into the room. We had, for instance, school teachers, young people, political activists, residents, women, also some disabled people into the room, and the facilitation had to be in 3 different languages, because that's how we are. We are quite diverse, even in a small area of 2-3 square kilometers. The results of the surveys from the students was presented, and then we had this technique which is called the 21st century technique, and it uses a system of networked computers, and then questions are posed to the group. These were the questions that we posed to that group. What do you value about Dattawadi? What do you want to change? What do you want to keep? And what are the priorities? What are hotspots? So this 21st century dialogue is the system, and then quickly to go through that, the group is actually divided into a number of sort of multi-stakeholder kind of tables. Each of the tables has a facilitator, a table facilitator, and while each of these questions is asked, the facilitator actually helps the group to discuss that question, and through their computer then actually collate the response of the table and feed it in, which is then taken into a final sort of platform where all the table's inputs are collated, which then yields this kind of a sheet where the entire room's input is collated. You can, of course, do this in a low-tech method without network computers. It's just that this makes it faster and much easier to group the input in different buckets of issues and responses. And so each of these questions had these, and then the people were asked to vote, again through a structured systematic process, and this is what they came up with. And then this input was taken, and actually like the day's proceedings are printed out as a report, and this is quite important because this helps to, for the participants to believe in the process, have faith in the process, that this was discussed, and this is what we have a copy of at the end of the day. Of course, it puts a lot of stress on the managers of the process, and because you are trying to convene and facilitate the discussion as well. You have a team which is taking in the input and printing out the report ready for 5 o'clock. So it's pretty action-packed. The students of architecture, they and the faculty, the technical team, they worked overnight and developed some conceptual designs, which were then taken back to Dattawadi, and this meeting was held in a school there, and a lot more people participated there. This time it was primarily in Marathi. All the conceptual designs were displayed at 6 or 7 different stations, and then we had these groups, again facilitated, where they were able to comment on the designs that were produced, and actually actually give their suggestions, and then finally actually vote on the comments that had been received at each of the stations. Now, this was basically the sum total of the deliberative process, and the priorities that the participants had expressed in terms of which design they liked was then taken forward and submitted to the municipal corporation for execution. And this is the kind of response that participants had about the whole process, that they felt that this was a good process, that they felt like citizens, and that it was almost a spiritual matter, that they were able to exercise their vote and give their input into something which is a public process. And the lower ones are the responses from the students who were involved, and they've heard about participatory planning but not really experienced it. And so this was a very powerful way of also helping architecture and urban design students to understand what their future careers might actually involve if they are involved in public space design or public policy related design. And these were the two sort of elected representatives who were mainly associated with the process. On the left, the local corporator, and on the right, the member of parliament. And both of them actually agreed to fund the project that was developed, and that the process was good and transparent and yielded a lot of interest from the citizens was very important for them to be able to see that this is something that we put our money in. And later, the corporator, in fact, went to the council, the city council, to ask for extra money to implement the project. Now, we've, of course, gone forward into taking that experience into more street design projects. In fact, 4 are happening in the city just now, and I'll go and join them when I return. And they are generating a lot of interest, and they're complex, of course, and I don't know if it will finally, how they'll play out, but we think that they will make a significant difference. The kinds of issues we are dealing with in street design are spaces for street vendors and hawkers, for pedestrians, and it's quite dense uses of spaces, and it becomes a bit of a conflict. But then, since we have a law on street vendors, we have this backing that the city government has to work out new designs. So that's the kind of discussion which is currently going on. The other thing, Giovanni, is that we had a process. We have a kind of attenuated participatory budgeting process in Pune for some time now, for about 8 to 10 years, but not so deliberative. In the first year, it was deliberative, and all the suggestions came in, and people were able to sit together in groups and look at, what has come in, and how do we, if the money allocated is only 50 lakh rupees, and the number of projects is more than 50 lakh rupees, how do we prioritize? But since then, there hasn't been a discussion at all. And we thought that it might be a good idea to look at this instrument, which is a good and powerful instrument that citizens can actually give in their suggestions, and see what else we need to do with that instrument so that we can make it more effective. And we assembled a group. Again, it's people from different walks of life. And they actually then looked at examples of how participatory budgeting are taking place in different parts of the world, and including this resource allocation framework of looking at index of how much infrastructure is there in different parts of the city, etc. And they came up with a number of suggestions which were given to the city government. And so, this something called the WISE project emanated from that discussion, because the municipal commissioner felt that this is something that must be done. And one of the things that came out was that, the budget book of the city of Pune is something like this. It's a huge tome, and it's a book, and nobody can actually read it. It's there available, but it's very difficult for citizens to actually access it. And even if it's available online, it's in a PDF and not analyzable. So it's quite difficult for people to have the information that they need. And what we figured is that, the absence of information or inadequate information. In India, what is happening, this is a problem that I'd like to share, that in deliberation, information is very critical, but and in India, it is becoming more and more available. if you were looking at the pillars of governance and information becomes a critical ingredient, we have something called the right to information. Now, the information is available, but it's not something that you can easily work with. You have to do something to make it actually comprehensible and relevant to the discussion at hand. And so that becomes something that is important for the designers of the process to actually feed. And somebody spoke about the power which is associated with the facilitators of processes and designers of processes. And I think certainly it's right, because you need to be able to bring in good information, but that gives you a certain kind of power also. So that's something to think about as we go forward in deliberation. Yeah. And the other thing that was mentioned, of course, in the morning was that how do you deal with people who are then non-literate? It is something that we are dealing with, trying to figure out. We have these multiple translations and facilitators who are trained to actually speak in different languages and actually try and communicate things which are then not, not being able to be read. The other part is that society in India and in many developing countries is very diverse. And of course, it's a source of strength for us, because you get a number of different cultural inputs, different kinds of knowledge bases, but also that the structural inequality becomes a challenge because there are so many types of divides. And communities which have been repressed, you would find that, say, a waste collector woman who's a Dalit, she would not even consider herself a citizen. And if she's invited into a forum like that, it takes special skills to get everybody to speak and give their input. Of course, we do feel that these are the kinds of fora. The deliberative fora are also the platform where you can correct such injustices. But on the other hand, of course, it is a challenge for process designers and facilitators that how do you, say, frame issues so that they become relevant to your issues of survival? Are they very abstract? Then how do you actually make them relevant to issues of survival? And also that these relationships are quite dynamic. With affirmative action, you have sometimes corporators who are able to actually change caste relationships. The other bit is on the sortition issue. This idea of, how do you actually get representatives is that electoral rolls is one source that we've had, and we've tried to invite people in through random sampling of from electoral rolls. But we've had some difficulties because we find that the electoral roll has up to 30-35% error. This is what we found in our experience in Pune, and also research shows that there is a large part of the population left out, 30-35%, which may be because of high migration rates in Indian cities, and also they are looking at whether there is deliberate exclusion of certain parts of the communities. The other thing that we've tried is this lists of mass-based organizations, and people might prefer to send chosen representatives rather than random sampled. A lot more work is needed in sortition, of course, in a complex place like this. We've been looking at how we go forward. We are looking at governance as a vertical as well in different sectors, and we feel that there are two projects that are happening looking at transparency, accountability, participation, and a toolkit developed to assess governance. And the idea is that could we look at participation in each of these segments which are nested, from policy development to program development, standards, making of budgets, and then execution of project, and like you said, review. Yeah, we feel that high-quality deliberations, public deliberations, do tap the ability of citizens and diverse stakeholders. They are possibly a good way to address certain kinds of complex issues. These interactions amongst different people of different walks of life actually help generate new ways of thinking and knowledge. They do help reduce corruption and possibly enhance the trust which is necessary for innovation. I'm sorry I've taken a lot of time, but thanks for hearing me out.
Thank you so much, Professor Bruno Kaufman, Mr. Giovanni Allegretti, and Mrs. Sanskriti Menon, and thanks for our interpreters for the great job. Thank you.